Well, whenever I would turn the television on at the hotel and just check in with the news to see what was going on in the world, every time you turned it on, something new was canceled. It's Uncle Ben, it's Aunt Jemima, it's Eskimo pies. I felt like I was sitting at DFW looking at the departures board where it's just canceled, 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 canceled. Joining us to talk about this is New York Times bestselling author who you can read online at AnneCoulter.com. Anne Coulter, Anne, welcome.
Thank you. Good to be here, John Phillips.
We need a spreadsheet to figure out what's been canceled and what hasn't, don't we?
Well, the most important one, if you read, and you certainly did, and promoted my column last week, and follow me on Twitter, is canceling Yale. I mean, I'm against erasing history as a general matter. It'll get to the point that African Americans won't be able to explain, no, this is because of the legacy of slavery, because no one will know what it is anymore. These are just parts of history, and especially when you're talking about ripping down beautiful works of art, statues of great Americans who lived at the time of slavery, or were the president when we fought a civil war to end slavery. No, Abraham Lincoln statues are being torn down. Meanwhile, I happen to notice that one of America's premier educational institution, Yale, is named after not merely a slave owner, but a slave trader, Elihu Yale. And there may be people may not understand the distinction. Oh, who cares? Anything having to do with slavery, it's got to go. But the difference in a slave owner and a slave trader is like the difference between a woman who has had an abortion and an abortionist. Someone who takes drugs and a drug dealer. Slave traders were verboten even at the time of slavery. People wouldn't let their children play with the children of a slave trader. That is the man for whom Yale University is named after. And like I say, I'm not an enthusiast of canceling, but we're not talking about destroying a work of art. This is just changing a name. You're going to keep this institution named after a slave trader as Teddy Roosevelt statues are being torn down, George Washington statues are being... No, you still get the great professors and the lectures and the Gothic buildings and the dorm life at Yale, but they got to change their name.
Well, it sounds like this guy was a creep who was accepted because he threw around a lot of money. In many ways, he was the Jeffrey Epstein of his day. Right.
Well, he didn't go there. I mean, wasn't there. He just donated to it. And that is, I have been accepting proposals on Twitter for other names for Yale on a very popular Cancel Yale hashtag. But again, this isn't canceling the entire university. They don't have to shut down. They have to do something very simple, much simpler than watching irreplaceable works of art destroyed throughout the country. Change the name. And one idea was Steve Schwarzman, the BlackRock hedge fund guy, has donated $150 million to Yale, surely more even in today's dollars than Elihu Yale, the slave trader, did. So how about Schwarzman University? Or they could sell the naming rights and be like Epcot University, the way sports stadiums do. Someone else suggested they change it to Harvard. And just so there's no confusion, they could add an E at the end or spell it Harverd. There are many great ideas for renaming it. But I am serious. I lost. I don't think we should cancel anything. This is a very simple change, and we're talking about a slave trader here. We're not talking about, a brute like George Washington, the father of our country, or Abraham Lincoln, the great emancipator, to say nothing of, these Confederate bases. As I wrote in my column last week, what's so crazy about the renaming of the Confederate bases is nobody even knew who they were named after. I mean, there comes a point when your namesake fades into the background, and the new thing that got named is far more famous. Fort Bragg is famous as the home of whatever it is, I'm blanking. We know of Fort Bragg. We know of Fort Hood. Nobody even knows the first name of the Confederate general. It's not like people think, oh, that's Braxton Bragg. And I suppose that's the argument I'd use if I were Yale. No one thinks about Elihu Yale. But I lost that argument. And Yale is named after a slave trader, so that the name has got to go.
Well, at what point does this stop, though? Because there's no bigger god in the Democratic Party than FDR. And I drove back from Carson City, Nevada yesterday, and one of the counties you have to go through to get home is Inyo County. And in Inyo County was one of the biggest Japanese internment camps in the country. And I got off the freeway and I took a tour, because you don't need a tour guide, you can just do it in your car, of the Japanese internment camp that FDR put up and took Japanese Americans and put them in those camps during World War II. And reparations were paid, and it was a big deal. At what point did they start tearing down FDR statues? Martin Luther King had some pretty boutique views on gays and lesbians.
Right.
Does he get canceled?
Well, I think it's much like whom a devastating coronavirus attacks. It really depends what you're in a crowd for, as we've seen. If you're in a crowd to riot and protest, well, then there's no danger of the virus attaching to you. If you're trying to go to church, big problem. Oh, the coronavirus does not like churchgoers. And, not only FDR, you could go through slews of names. But one, I happen to notice that even the New York Times seems to be soft-pedaling Benjamin Franklin. I think he had one slave. But, what is today or yesterday, I think they had an article quoting in a story about, we're not sure if he even had that one slave. And I'm thinking, why is the New York Times protecting Benjamin Franklin? Well, of course, for your astute listeners, they will know that our founding fathers were extremely Christian, extremely religious. And if you went to an American educational institution, you are completely unaware of that fact. But it is a fact. The one semi-exception, today Benjamin Franklin would rank as a fundamentalist Jerry Falwell, but compared to his times, he was the least religious, the most secular, and consequently he is the New York Times' favorite founding father. So they seem to be protecting old Ben Franklin too. Like I say, I think it's stupid. I think this is part of history. You're not going to change what happened by taking down statues. The people who suffered still suffered. You're not changing anything, and this is a part of history. But the very least, literally the least an American university can do, one that is at the forefront of producing the very social justice warriors who are demanding everyone else rip down artwork and change names and take down Aunt Jemima and Uncle Ben's rice and so on and so forth, are the people who run an institution named after a slave trader. So, I'm just saying, don't complain about the sand in my eye when you've got a plank in yours.
Ann, can you stick with us for another segment?
Sure.
We're joined by Ann Coulter, whose columns you can read online at anncoulter.com. New York Times bestselling author. You can buy all of her books online at amazon.com. Treason happens to be my favorite, but maybe it's not yours. Maybe it's Slander or one of the others. More coming up with Ann, but right now it's time to take a look at the road. It's 1247 on the John Phillips Show. Talk Radio 790 KABC. 800-222-KABC is the number. 1-800-222-KABC. We're joined by Ann Coulter, who you can read online at anncoulter.com. And to the subject of cancel culture, the Democrats are going to be stuck with Joe Biden as their nominee in November. Joe Biden is a white guy from Pennsylvania who's almost 80 years old, who was part of the old boys club of the U.S. Senate for many, many, many years, which means he was pals with a bunch of people who would be problematic today by today's standards. He has supported certain pieces of legislation that are problematic by today's Democratic Party standards. What is this cancel culture going to do with a problematic candidate that's running against Donald Trump? Do they just put the blinders on, hear no evil, see no evil, or do they turn on him?
Yeah, nothing at all. You're barking up the wrong tree with that. Bill Clinton left after Yale, went to work for a ferocious segregationist, Senator Fulbright. Black people loved him. And I think the results of the South Carolina primary make it very clear that African American voters don't care about Burisma, do not care about any votes Biden cast, don't care about whatever Kamala, the half Jamaican, half Indian, was upset about. They certainly didn't care about Hillary Clinton and her effusive remarks about Bob Byrd. No, you're wasting your breath.
Well, I'm convinced, though, that the cancel culture isn't being driven by black voters. It's being driven by white liberals. I was at a gas station yesterday, and here in California, we're required to wear masks everywhere we go. It's stupid, but that's what the governor's edict was, so we have to follow it. So I was at the gas station, and there was a white liberal guy who was there wearing a mask, and there was a black woman who was not wearing a mask. And he starts to lecture her at the gas station on why she should be wearing a mask. And he was telling her how rude she was and how she doesn't care about the health and well-being of everyone around her. And she told him exactly where to go. And, you know, you look at other subjects locally. Adam Schiff just rescinded his endorsement of Jackie Lacey, the district attorney of Los Angeles County. Jackie is a black female Democrat who is the longtime district attorney and worked at the office before she became the elected herself. And Adam Schiff is now so woke, he has to tell the world that the black woman isn't good at her job.
Right. No, it's Debbie. You're absolutely right about this. Though I'm a little upset about the lootings and beating up white people right now. You're absolutely right. Black people are not the problem. They themselves are the victims of black crime. I'm sorry, that's a boring cliche. Why am I even saying it? But there is something very weird about some percentage of white people who are never apologizing for themselves. I mean, I do think it's very important, to point out that all these Dear fellow white people letters, they're not claiming they have done anything wrong. Oh, no. As one of my friends says, it's not a mea culpa, it's a thea culpa. I'm good, but these other white people are bad. And that, I don't know what it is, 20% of white people, 40% of white people, there is nothing that gives them more of a thrill, a frisson, a rush of self-righteousness than accusing someone else, i.e. some other white person, of racism, including your pal Schiff attacking a black
Not my pal. What did you think of the Trump rally in Tulsa?
Well, I thought, even before seeing it, that it was really stupid for him to be bragging about 1 million people coming. I think a lot of us thought, I don't know if I'd go to that. I mean, it's an indoor theater. People are going to be shouting. And as you know, I've been one of the skeptics of this COVID hysteria from day one. But if you're going to avoid anything, And I don't think we should be avoiding anything outdoors, brief encounters. But what we do know now is in general, I mean, probably not young people unless they're hanging around with old people, probably not healthy people unless they're hanging around with unhealthy people, should be avoiding confined spaces for long periods of time, and people shouting or singing or hugging, that sort of thing. So I was kind of suspicious of the whole thing, but it's typical Trump. You have to be constantly bragging about yourself. I'd also point out here, I've been a little disappointed that instead of actually doing anything as our country burns, all Trump does is tweet out stuff like, yeah, not going to get away with this on my watch. Well, wait a second, sir. This is your watch, and this is what is happening in the country you're the president of, including, as he said at the rally, I didn't even know about this. Man, they're covering up some of the looting, that a 100-year-old statue in front of the post office in Washington, D.C. was apparently torn down a few days ago. Well, you know, D.C. is the seat of government. That is under federal control. That is why it's not a state. It's not because 200 years later it became, I don't even think it is majority black anymore, but it was majority black for a few decades. They act like this is some, you know, racist thing. Oh, black people. No, it's in the Constitution. You can't have the seat of government be a state. In any event, he has authority over that, and he doesn't do anything. All we get is law and order tweets. No, you're the guy in charge here. But people say, the 3D chess crowd, respond to me by saying, oh, yes, but if he did anything, the media would complain. The optics would be bad. Well, I wish we had known that when he was running for president. I'll do all this stuff unless the media complains. Then, forget it, I'll be prostrate on the ground. But as for the optics, boy, he sure doesn't mind risking optics when it comes to promoting himself. It's only when we're talking about saving an American city, saving police stations from being abandoned and burned to the ground in the United States of America. He's the president. But, he doesn't worry about optics when it's, I got to do the rally. No, his narcissism, I mean, it's just out of control.
Prior to Trump, who had the healthiest ego in politics that you ever witnessed?
Oh, that's a good question. Maybe Clinton.
He had a pretty healthy ego. I thought
about that a little longer. I just sort of burst out with that one. But, I mean, for example, Teddy Kennedy had quite an ego. I always figured Clinton was in the White House saying, you know, that guy killed a girl and ran for Senate, even turned around and, 7 years later ran for president. I'll be damned if I'm leaving the White House just for molesting an intern. But no, he just absolutely stuck it out. And I there actually is a bit of a parallel with Trump. The delight in, as long as I can fool 51% of the people, I'm fine with insulting the intelligence of the other 49%.
I always thought Bob Byrd had a pretty healthy ego because he named everything in the state of West Virginia after himself while he was still alive.
Yes, that's good government these days. Stealing from the American people and building massive projects that will then be named after you. Also, Senator Stevens from Alaska. I mean, they did him dirty, but he was probably my least favorite Republican senator for that precise reason.
Well, if they want to tear down everything named after Bob Byrd, the state of West Virginia is not going to have a bridge left.
That's a good point. Oh, my gosh, you're right.
You better go buy a boat.
And why haven't they gone after Byrd? You see, it's like the COVID virus.
Ann Coulter, thank you so much for joining us. Always a pleasure.
Good to talk to you, John Phillips. Bye-bye.
You can read Ann online at anncoulter.com. You can follow her on Twitter at Ann Coulter. Coming up in just a few minutes, Dr. Kelly Victory is going to join us. She'll be taking your calls all 1 o'clock hour, anything related to COVID, anything related to situations, the mask requirement, any new edicts coming from Governor Newsom. All of that will be discussed. If you have a question, I suggest getting on board right now at 800-222-KABC, 1-800-222-5222. It can be very difficult to get through once the hour starts. So if you have a question, I suggest you call right now, 800-222-KABC, 1-800-222-5222. 2 more hours coming up on The John Phillips Show, live and local, right here on Talk Radio 790 KABC.
We will make America great again.